Hi everybody, BriansWorldOfWheels.com with my top 10 muscle cars of the original classic muscle car era. Before we get started, I think it's important to cover a little bit of history. For those that may not know, in the 60s, NASCAR and drag racing was professional racing that was done with actual stock cars, which is why they called it stock car racing. In other words, if a person wanted to be in NASCAR, they did not build this tube frame with a plastic body and a million safety features. No, they literally went down to the dealership of their choice, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, Plymouth, whatever, filled out a form, plunked down the cash, and bought the car from the dealership, and that's what they raced. So a lot of the car's features and functions you'll see were made basically just for racing, because at that time, in order to qualify for racing, there were several things that had to happen. Number one, the car had to have a 5-year, 50,000-mile warranty from the factory. And number two, at least 50 of those cars had to be produced. And number three, they had to be offered to the public. And that prevented dealerships from saying, well, I'm going to make 5 of these amazing cars that are ridiculously fast, and we're going to call those production. That didn't work. They had to make 50 of them, and you had to be able to buy them yourself. So although these are race cars with a license plate, some individuals would just go down and fill out the form and buy these cars because they wanted to have the fastest car on the street. They wanted to have the baddest car in town. So when you're looking at some of these cars, you may say, who on earth would drive that to work every day? Well, some people bought them for that, and some people bought them just for weekend cars, but a lot of them were made for NASCAR racing, which is why a lot of these cars are extremely rare today and very hard to find because they got raced to death. So without further ado, let's look at that top 10 list. Number 10, the 68 Shelby Mustang GT500 KR. This is one of those cars that was made specifically for NASCAR racing. This came with a 429 cubic inch big block, factory 12.5 to 1 compression, racing pistons, a Holley 735 CFM carburetor, and a very aggressive cam. This was made for nothing but NASCAR racing. Laughably, they rated this at 335 horsepower and 440 torque. Reality was the numbers were well over that. Horsepower was way over 400, but again, they were being conservative to keep the competition from knowing what they were up to. By the way, this car got 9 miles per gallon on the streets. Number 9. The 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. This car was a 455 cubic inch big block. Aggressive cam, high compression heads. They gave it a specially tuned 4-barrel quadrajet carburetor, aggressive ignition timing, mated it with an M22 Rock Crusher 4-speed transmission, and they laughably rated this one at 360 horsepower and 510 torque. Again, a massive 455 with an aggressive cam putting out 360 horsepower? No way, guys. Buick, we're not believing you. Now, the interesting thing about the GSX Stage 1, as I was mentioning, you could order all these options from the dealership and whatnot and from the factory. Well, Buick decided that for those guys that wanted to have the ultimate street machine, not a professional race car, they could buy what's called the Stage 2 option. Stage 2 did not qualify for NASCAR, did not qualify for professional racing because it was a dealer-installed option. So if you bought the GSX Stage 1 and you checked off the box for Stage 2, in the trunk, when it arrived at the dealership, would be a box of additional parts. That box of parts included higher compression pistons, an Edelbrock aluminum intake, a Holley carburetor, a ridiculously radical cam, and some additional new push rods. And that pushed the horsepower even further, but then again, it was not available for NASCAR. It had a special VIN number on it so that they could not put it in NASCAR, could not put it in professional racing, but for the guy that wanted the ultimate street rod, that gave them a very aggressive car right from the factory. But since that was a dealer installed option, the Stage 2 did not qualify. That car got 8 miles per gallon. Number 8, the 1969 Pontiac GTO Judge. Pontiac also wanted to get in the races in 1969, and they found that their GTOs just weren't competing. So they came up with a new package, the Race Ready Judge, with a Ram Air 4 option you could get the 400 cubic inch big block, 10.75 to 1 compression, freer flowing heads, an aluminum intake, an aggressive cam, recalibrated ignition, limited slip rear end, and a 4-speed close ratio manual transmission. This car had a rating of only 370 horsepower and 445 torque. But again, we know that that was not accurate. On the streets, it got 10 miles per gallon. Number 7, the 1970 Ford Boss 429 Mustang. By 1970, the Shelby Mustang era was coming to a close, and Ford needed a way to compete at the NASCAR level. So they took a lot of the ideas they had from our number 10 car, the 68 Mustang GT 500 KR Shelby, and integrated it into their new Boss Series Mustangs. The Boss 429 had, as you'd imagine, a 429 cubic inch big block, a Holley 735 4-barrel, came with a ram air hood scoop, aluminum high-rise intake. It came with headers instead of exhaust manifolds, had a built-in oil cooler, and since they had some configuration issues, they mounted the battery in the trunk. This car had a factory 4-speed manual. You could not get an automatic transmission. It was not an option. It even had power front disc brakes, which was pretty rare in 1970. Since it was only built to qualify for NASCAR, they did not have air conditioning as an option or a heater, so it was very sparse and very bare bones. It was just a race car with a license plate, literally. They conservatively rated this at 375 horsepower and 450 torque, and I have a bit of a hard time saying that with a straight face. Actual numbers are not 375 and 450. They're probably more like 500 and 550. On the streets, you got 9 miles per gallon. The number 6 car on our list is probably a lot less well known than some of the other ones. This is the earliest car we're going to look at. This is a 62 Pontiac Catalina Super Duty. This was a car that was made strictly for NASCAR. People did not buy these for daily drivers. It had a 421 cubic inch big block, 4-inch bore, 4-inch stroke, Mickey Thompson forged aluminum pistons, and remember guys, this is all from the factory, forged connecting rods, a cast aluminum intake, and dual Carter 4-barrels. So you had dual quads on this thing. Underrated at 405 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque. And on the streets, it was rated at 8 miles per gallon. Number 5, the 62 Chevrolet Bel Air 409. The Beach Boys even wrote a song about this. She's so fine, my 409. This car had the factory option of a posi-track rear end, dual 4-barrel carburetors, 4-speed manual transmission, and with that 409 cubic inch big block engine, they laughably rated this at 409 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque. If you've ever ridden in one of these or seen one of these, you know that 409 is a really low number. This was probably well over 500 to 550. It was a massively torquey, massively powerful engine. It got 11 miles per gallon on the streets. Number 4, the Copo Camaro. The 1969 Chevy Copo Camaro is one of those that was made strictly and specifically for racing. You might have heard that term Copo before. What that means is Central Office Production Order. That was a special division that Chevrolet had for people that wanted to buy these one-off, crazy configuration cars, and the Copo Camaro was definitely one of those. The Copo Camaro was a 427 iron block engine, 11 to 1 compression, forged aluminum pistons, forged steel rods, forged crank, 520 lift cam, which is a very aggressive cam, special steel alloy valves, a Holley 780 4-barrel, and they rated it at 425 horsepower and 460 torque, which, I hate to say it, but again, that's a ridiculously low number. Ridiculously low number. And it got 11 miles per gallon on the streets. Number 3. From that same type of Copo office comes the 69 Corvette ZL1. You may have heard of this car before. It's very rare, but it was made strictly for racing. This car includes an all-aluminum 427 big block, heavy-duty rods, open-chambered heads, a posi-track rear end, 4-speed transmission, No radio, no air conditioning. You could not get any luxury options of any kind. It was basically a seat with a great big 427 in it. Very expensive, very rare car. Even at the time, it cost about 3 times as much as the typical car, 4 times as much as some of these cars. And they laughably rated it at 425 horsepower and 460 torque. The reality is many of these cars have been dynoed and tested and put out 585 horsepower and 600 torque. On the streets, you got 7 miles per gallon, guys. 7. Number 2, the 1970 Chevy Chevelle LS6 Supersport 454. This was a Copo option RPO Z15. This was a big 454 cubic inch big block. It came from the factory with hydraulic lifters, forged steel crank, 11.25 to 1 compression. It had a massive 800 CFM Holley 4-barrel to feed this big engine, an M22 Rock Crusher 4-speed transmission. Interestingly enough, they had to make some changes to the pulleys on the engine, the accessory pulleys that would run on the engine for the alternator and whatnot. They tried using the ones from the 396, but those literally would fall apart because this engine had a red line of, get this, 6,500 RPMs. For a 454 big block, that's a ridiculously high number in 1970. They advertised this car as 450 horsepower and 500 torque, but real numbers on this is much higher than that, probably 550 to 600 horsepower. This engine made ridiculous amounts of power. And by the way, it got an average of 6.2 miles per gallon. And before we reveal our number 1 of our top 10 muscle cars, don't forget to like this video, check out our other videos on this channel, subscribe to this channel, and visit us at briansworldofwheels.com for more muscle cars, fast cars, product reviews, all sorts of things. We even have a blog where we talk about concept cars and muscle cars, so be sure to check us out. And now for number 1. And now, guys, we're at number 1. No top 10 list would be complete without the 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda. This had a massive 7-liter 426 Hemi engine, often referred to as the Elephant Hemi because it was such a behemoth engine. These cars were built to compete with some of the other cars we just saw, the LS6 Chevelle 454, the 69 Corvette Z01, the Copo Camaros, the Boss Mustangs. These guys were really giving them a run for their money, so Plymouth said, well, all right, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to make this massive Hemi, and we're going to build this car from the factory for racing. So we're going to put 5 leaf springs on the right, 6 on the left, so that we can do some cornering around the track, around the NASCAR tracks. We're going to make it 2 inches shorter than the Challenger, and we're going to make this into an actual race car. Now, the Hemis were notoriously hard to tune, and they were also notorious for the fact that they had so much horsepower that at the time our technology just couldn't keep up with it, and they would rip themselves apart going down the quarter-mile strip just because they had more power than our technology could even handle at the time. Of course, the new Hemis, as you know, they could make 800 horsepower and have no problem, but at that time, 1970, the technology just wasn't there yet. So this engine was truly ahead of its time. They laughably rated this car at 475 horsepower and 490 torque, which is the top rating of all the cars we've seen. But in reality, if you've ever asked somebody that's had a Hemi Cuda from that era, or if you've ever ridden in one, they're going to say 475 horsepower. Maybe if the carburetor's not tuned and it's got a dead miss on one of the cylinders, then maybe I'll make 475. But if it's actually tuned right, you're looking at 550 to 600 horsepower. Massive cars. This car on the streets got 9 miles per gallon. Well, guys, that's it for our top 10 list. I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and check us out at briansworldofwheels.com. Bye-bye.